It wasn't a sudden surplus of mining output. It wasn't a clerical error in the customs data. It wasn't even a standard trade rebalancing strategy. It was a desperate liquidity signal. Disguised as market management, the arithmetic is merciless. When a sovereign power abruptly reverses a strategic resource policy, it is never an accident, it is a symptom. The sudden release of 660 tons of silver by Chinese stakeholders marks a critical inflection point. It signals that the pressure inside the containment vessel has exceeded the structural limits of the hull. This is not about the price of a metal, it is about the stability of a currency and the solvency of a banking system. The pattern is unmistakable. History shows us that when empires begin to hemorrhage their strategic reserves, they are not selling from strength, they are selling to buy time. We have seen this specific sequence of events play out in the collapse of every major hegemon for the last 2,000 years. To understand why Beijing just unlocked the vaults, we must look at the historical precedent. We must look at what happens when the cost of maintaining an empire exceeds the empire's ability to pay for it. The timeline of decline is written in the movement of silver and gold. Proof of this pattern lies in three specific historical case studies: the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, and finally the direct mapping of these events onto the current data coming out of Shanghai. The first case study takes us to the Roman Empire, specifically the reign of Nero in the 1st century AD. Before 64 AD, the Roman denarius was a standard of purity. It was nearly 100% silver. It was the bedrock of Mediterranean trade, but the costs of empire were mounting. The legions required payment, the bureaucracy required funding, and the imperial court demanded luxury. Then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. The fiscal shock was immediate and overwhelming. Nero faced a mathematical impossibility. He could not tax the citizens enough to rebuild the city and pay the army, so he chose the monetary shortcut. He began to debase the currency. He reduced the silver content of the denarius to roughly 90%. This was the first silver dump in recorded imperial history. By mixing base metals into the coinage, he effectively flooded the market with more units of currency, while the actual amount of silver remained constant. For the average Roman soldier stationed in Germania, the change was invisible at first. He received his pay, he bought his bread, but the market knew. Gresham's law took hold immediately. Citizens hoarded the older, heavier silver coins and spent the new debased ones. Prices began to creep upward. By the time of the crisis of the 3rd century, the silver content had collapsed to under 5%. The denarius became a washed-out token of copper and bronze. The middle class, the backbone of the Roman civic structure, was wiped out by the resulting inflation. They were priced out of land. They were priced out of influence. The state had sold its future to pay for its present. The flight into hard assets accelerated until the economy reverted to barter. The lesson here is stark. The manipulation of silver supply is always the first tremor of a coming earthquake. Just like the Roman debasement, the Spanish Empire of the 16th century fell victim to the same illusion. This is our second case study. Under King Philip IV, Spain controlled the greatest silver mine the world had ever seen, the mountain of Potosi in present-day Bolivia. The extraction rate was staggering. Galleons laden with hundreds of tons of silver crossed the Atlantic annually. The Spanish crown believed they had discovered infinite wealth, but they had confused money with productivity. The incentive was to spend, not to build. Spain used this silver to wage endless wars across Europe. They fought the Dutch, they fought the English, they fought the Ottomans. To finance these conflicts, the crown did not just spend the silver they had, they borrowed against the silver they expected to arrive next year. They flooded the European market with metal. This was the price revolution between 1500 and 1650. Prices in Europe multiplied by 600% in some sectors. A Spanish shoemaker in Castile found that, despite the empire's wealth, he could no longer afford the leather to make his shoes. His wages could not keep pace with the cost of grain. The silver did not stay in Spain. It flowed out to pay German bankers and Italian merchants. It flowed to China to buy silk and porcelain. The domestic economy of Spain hollowed out completely. They had dumped their silver into the global market to sustain their imperial ambitions. But the blowback was domestic hyperinflation. The middle class evaporated. Land ownership concentrated in the hands of the aristocracy and the church. The empire went bankrupt not once, not twice but 9 times between 1557 and 1666. The abundance of silver became the instrument of their demise because they used it to paper over structural deficits, rather than fixing them, just like the Spanish mismanagement of flows. The British Empire in the 20th century faced the same reckoning. This is our third case study. By the mid-20th century, the British pound sterling was the reserve currency of the world. But the empire was exhausted by 2 world wars, the debt was astronomical, the industrial base was aging. To maintain the illusion of strength, the British government maintained a peg. They promised that the pound was worth a fixed amount of gold in dollars. But the market arithmetic did not support this valuation. Throughout the 1960s, the Bank of England was forced into a series of desperate defensive maneuvers. They did not just use interest rates, they used their strategic reserves. They joined the London Gold Pool, a consortium of central banks attempting to suppress the price of gold and keep the currency system stable. They were effectively dumping hard assets into the market to soak up excess liquidity. It was a battle of attrition. The British worker saw the result in the stop-go economic cycles. 1 year the economy would expand, the next the government would slam on the brakes to defend the pound. Capital controls were tightened. Brits were restricted in how much money they could take abroad. But the market is a relentless weighing machine. The pressure built up until the dam broke. In 1967 the pound was devalued. The London Gold Pool collapsed shortly after. The flight to hard assets accelerated. British real estate became the only sanctuary for wealth preservation. As the 1970s inflation took hold, the middle class watched their savings erode in real terms. The government had sold its family silver to defend a political fiction, and when the metal was gone, the fiction evaporated with it. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is the peak of dominance, Stage 2 is the onset of overextension, Stage 3 is the monetary shortcut, Stage 4 is the emergence of instability, Stage 5 is the flight to hard assets, Stage 6 is the social fracture, Stage 7 is the collapse and reset. Just like the British defense of sterling, the current situation in China maps directly onto Stage 4 of this cycle. The release of 660 tons of silver is not a random trade event. It is a calculated maneuver within a constrained system. Watch the premium on Shanghai silver. It is the thermometer of the patient. We are watching